I think one of the things about, like you said, hiring an expert, we're right in the middle of negotiations right now with a client, is that one, you want to take that time, right? You want to take that time to really get to know your potential hires. And I will say that there is, if you're hiring a good SDR, they're going to sell you on themselves, right? Like, so it's to some extent, it's hard to see those red flags up front because their job is to sell you. And even better, right? Like if you've got a great person who can sell themselves, hopefully they can do that for your business as well. But if you're churning people because you're not good at seeing those red flags, or you're not good at hiring, or you're not good at interviewing, then you are just throwing money out the door left and right. Every time you have to transition someone in, transition them out. And that's why, like, I know you and I advocate for bringing in a team like ours where we come in fractionally and consult and get your foundation set and get you set up for success on making sure that you are not only getting, gosh, combined hundreds of years of experience from different departments to make sure that you will be able to run versus walk, and take that time to hire a good internal, is so valuable. I can't even explain how much I've watched some companies, how much money they've wasted on the wrong event agency, the wrong internal event hire. I've had clients who have let me interview their people before they hire them for their internal events team, because there are things that I know about how the inner workings of, oh, look at my bubbles, inner workings of what events do that others might not know to look for, right? Those little red flags or those bonus things that people, if they say or do, you know that they're a good fit. And I think the other point is, like, I think you touched on this, is I've heard a lot from, the VC side or the startup side of where you really should be investing in founders or people, not in products, right? So that makes a huge difference. You can have the most amazing product, which I know a couple colleagues who have, luckily under their purview, a great product, but they're destroying the company because they've made bad hires in people. And it's fascinating to watch. But yes, yes.
Fascinating and horrific at the same time. Because I mean, to be frank, there are many times in which, not to pat my own back, because I get things wrong all the time. I mentioned that, like, we made bad hires many times. I've sent out campaigns that are crap. It happens to everyone, with particularly anyone who has an element of humility and to acknowledge some of those failures. But oftentimes you see this happening and you think to yourself, I just want to be in the room, and I want to be trusted, to be listened to, because we can, from having done this many times, like, to be frank, we can often see this before those leaders do. And what frustrates me is how someone can, to your point, actually have an amazing product, have an amazing ability or potential to be incredibly successful, but their Achilles heel are people. And what's popping in my head as we're talking about this is one of my fundamental beliefs that has guided me throughout my career well, and has brought me to where I am today, and that is respect the network and invest in the network. Mm-hmm. Because I mentioned before, you want to hire A players, they're going to back channel you. Mm-hmm. Your reputation, I don't care how much money is in your bank. I don't care how many exits you've had. I don't care how good that technology is. If you are not trusted as a leader to be in a place where anyone's willing to work for you who's an A player, you're not going to be successful. And you really have to have a respect for others, because it is true that good players, A players, have choice. Even in today's market, there is choice. Mm-hmm. And if you want the best chance at success, this is my second learning, you have to hire the right people, and you need to trust them to own. As in,
Mhm.
Make sure you have function leaders who are empowered to lead. And as basic as that sounds, so if your expertise is engineering, I hope that that individual can have the final say in decisions that affect engineering. I would hope the same, selfishly, but as a matter of physics, for sales development. We have to be trusted to make decisions that are in the realm of sales development or event planning, because we know when we are not given the power or trust to make those decisions, first of all, who are you going to help hold accountable when things go wrong? So when I sent out that crap campaign, you can't come to me and complain if it was you who called the play.
Mhm.
If someone's successful, how do you know who to promote? If it's, and I think of this dynamic a lot, if it's death by consensus, which is something I see play out where you have 5 people in a room, 10 opinions, the loudest one wins, you're
Mhm.
not going to know whose success is responsible for what just happened, whose failure is responsible for what just happened, and you're not going to be trusted as a leader either. Because no one wants to be micromanaged. No one wants to be in a position of knowing a lot of things and having a lot of experience and not being heard. So these learnings, again, are what guided, I know, my success and many, many folks' success. It's people, relationships. You
Mhm.
can't cheat that. I don't care who you are.
Great, great point. And I think that one of the biggest things that you and I probably run into is after you make a great hire, no matter how great they are, if the onboarding process into your company is not good or even great, that you can tank somebody really quick by not making sure that they have all the tools and resources and everything that they need. I know that in events we it's a huge thing. Anybody who comes to work for me gets the same onboarding process each time. They get walked through every detail of what they need to do, how we like to do things, and making sure that they know the process and what's expected of them. But so many places I've been also have not given you that. You've just had to figure it out. And if you're not a self starter, that can be hugely detrimental to your career. So when it comes to sales development, how obviously it's important, but what are those key things that you need to be onboarding somebody with to make them successful and powerful for you?
I, when it comes to sales development, you have to remember certain fundamentals about this segment, this function. In contrasting this to marketing, which I think is important because when a lot of people think of sales development, they think like email campaigns and stuff like that. It's still important. Um, there's a sales culture to sales development in the vast majority of folks who do this work. And you need to understand what that means from an onboarding perspective, from a talent management perspective, from a cultural perspective. When an SDR starts at a company and they have that cultural underpinning, a lot of folks refer to SDRs as hunters. Kind of, I generally am okay and like that term. Sometimes it annoys me because it implies that SDRs are just like these rogue individuals out in the woods with a makeshift bow and arrow killing a mastodon or something. No, there is machinery behind this and there's a team behind this. They're not just these little independent forces who are competing against each other. It's kind of a tangent, but it's important to understand who these people are because when they start, they need to trust you. And I think this applies not just to sales folks or sales development folks in general. They need to trust you. You have to get their buy-in, particularly with sales development, because everyone, I do this myself. Maybe those folks listening, if you've crafted any sort of sales development motion before you do this too, you have your own way of doing things. If you're hiring someone who's had success before and they've done it before, they will have opinions more so than those green folks will. They're not as moldable oftentimes. So you have to very artfully create bumpers in the bowling alley to where those individuals are empowered to apply those learnings, but do so in a way that is in line with your architecture. And most importantly, I think this is the most important answer to your question, get wins quickly. The biggest, fastest, most awful, terrible way of taking a new SDR's career trajectory is to have them not get meetings, not source deals quickly. Why? Because they're salespeople. They are competitive. They oftentimes in their compensation structure have a variable component. Salespeople need to sell things. And so when I'm thinking about this from an architecture, management, director-ish level, I'm thinking, how can I balance getting success quickly with, yes, the ideal of it's the right perfect person that they got a meeting with and everything is already perfect down funnel to where, oh, it's okay if they don't source a conversation in the next 3 months. That's fine because there's an onboarding period. Yes, teach them the product. Please enable us, give us tools, train us. We're not the hunters with the makeshift bow and arrow hunting a mastodon. No, we are professionals who want to be deep and understand the product from a technical perspective, understand it could be those marketing persona mappings that marketers create. It could be anything. We want to learn, but you know what we also want to do? We want to get some wins under our belt because that is what motivates us. And so you really have to balance a perfect idyllic onboarding in which they're spending hours and hours and hours digesting bits about the company with the practical reality of, do they have a list to send out? Do they have data? Do they have a script? Do they know how to go live quickly and efficiently and in the best way possible? Because you don't want them getting demotivated. That will tank their trajectory. It's very hard to recover from that. And I've seen that tank teams, not just individuals, but teams many times before.
Okay, we've touched on this twice now in this conversation, so I'm going to go ahead and dive into it before we conclude this podcast. Is compensation. Let's talk about just a little bit about compensation and how we've talked about how it kind of can affect how someone performs, or good or bad, right? But is there any magic combination of how compensation should look when you're initially hiring someone? Obviously, stage of company, the experience, all of that is highly important. But we talk about this in any vertical, in any company, is that you have to compensate your people well, right? Like you do need to make sure that people are not, especially I feel like salespeople, that they're not stressed out that they can pay their bills at the end of the day, because that's going to take up more time in their head than trying to make you a sale, right? But I think sometimes leaders get compensation wrong because they feel that, okay, I need to motivate them to get that sale. Like for salespeople, is that more motivation to have a big ticket at the end of that sale, or is it better for them to have a more stable, balanced comp plan? Like what's your recommendation on that?
It's
a big question.
Oh, opinions. Here we go. Here's the thing. Remember the fundamentals. Just like I talk about, salespeople like to sell things. They like to make money. They are also people who need to pay bills. At the end of the day, I think compensation needs to reward an individual for doing more of the things they can control to be successful. Now, if you unpack what that means, we uncover some very important variables to consider in your control. That's important because I think that is the largest space or variable in which comp plans fail their salespeople and sales teams in general. If I'm tying an SDR's compensation in a significant proportion of that compensation to something not in their control, then they are going to be demotivated quickly. Let me give you an example. In many comp plans for SDRs, there are qualification criteria. Things like, did the person show up? Kind of obvious, that's important. Did they show up to the meeting? Things like, what was their title? Things like, did the company have a certain number of employees? Oftentimes, those things are mostly within the SDR's control. But even then, you have to be aware of things like in that variable of did the person show up? If the meeting's happening with the account executive, their behavior kind of matters with that too. But that's kind of another topic. You need to make sure you're not tying compensation to things they literally have no control over, like timing is a variable that I see SDRs get dinged for unfairly many times. Again, this kind of depends on certain things about the product, certainly depends on whether you're inbound or outbound. But certainly for outbound, that can be very challenging for an SDR to control. And then also things like, and I know this can be controversial, do you tie compensation to actual sales? So closed won deals. And my thought on this is, yeah, you can go down that road, but here's what you have to be careful of. I open my computer every day. I look at a list of people I need to engage. I decide how to engage them. I then pick up the phone and dial or do whatever I need to do. In that second, am I thinking to myself, if I do that extra thing, like make a call or send another email, am I closer to my goal? If there's something outside of that person's control, let's say it's closing the deal, which SDRs, unless they're SMB, oftentimes don't have the capacity or it's not part of the role to do, then the distance between that motivating force of dopamine and actually doing doing the thing that matters is much higher if they're being tied to something that they don't control. But if I tell an SDR, I will pay you, if the right person, again, you have control over that. Why? Because of all that data magic we talked about, shows up, and has a meeting with an account executive, I will pay you. Then I can get myself to a place where it's easier to make that extra marginal call, that extra activity, because at the end of the day, activities are what matter the most when it comes to SDR success, assuming they have the right data. But does that mean that you can't create mechanisms to align, as we say, an SDR to those broader business goals? Absolutely not. I'm a fan of giving an SDR a percentage of close one. Why? Because they contributed to that. Hell yeah. If I sourced an awesome deal, a whale of a deal that's 1,000 seats when the average deal is 100, and I source that 1,000, hell yeah, I want them to be motivated to be paid. Why? Because it does two things: money in the bank, but also personal motivation and culture building. You feel aligned to your team members in the closing function. And then the last bit of this I think is important is thinking about variable versus base. Oftentimes, I think folks can get that a bit wrong, where if it's too much variable, then you fail the test that you mentioned, Ashley, of can I pay my bills? You shouldn't starve your SDR or have the prospect of starving be on the table. Why? Because it's not a green game anymore. You need to hire professionals. Oftentimes professionals, they might have a mortgage if they're lucky and maybe don't have one of those 8% ones. They might have a family. They have to pay bills. Respect that. And therefore give them a healthy base and a ramp quota that is reasonable. And then the last, most important bit of this, modeling and reasonable but aggressive assumptions. I want my goal to connect to that model that ugly spreadsheet I talked about earlier. If your goaling is not founded in data and in facts and very highly educated guesses, you are blue skying. Oftentimes it's to the disadvantage of SDRs, right? It's like you set the goal too high. That's going to kill the motivation. It's going to kill the connection between teams. It's going to have them sell less over time. And so reasonable goals, but aggressive. Oftentimes we talk about this as stretch goaling. Stretch it a little bit, but you don't want to break that sense of reasonability, because at the end of the day, again, back channeling. First thing SDRs ask me, the good ones, is how are folks doing on the team? 70-something%, those scary metrics of SDRs today are not meeting quota. Do you
Hmm.
want to answer that A player as, oh, so yeah, the vast majority of folks on the team are not making quota right now. Um, that's not okay. And obviously, there are things in your control that can make that better. Of course, some things that might not. But uh, human beings who need to be motivated to sell things within their control. If you just remember that and you're reasonable about how you set that going, you're going to be fine. Hopefully, maybe. But that's it.
Love it. Sean, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Let's just keep it old fashioned. Go on LinkedIn. A Bloom Consulting is
Hmm.
my consulting company. My name is Sean Erickson. Just find me on LinkedIn and hit me up. Find me through you, Ashley,
Yep. Get off
because
the website.
I'm creeping on your stuff all the time. I give you all those different emojis. I love it. Give me some emojis too, and we'll see you on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you.